Welcome to the 18th episode of the series Decolonizing the Mind. I said the previous episode that I'll spend some time and some episodes on talking about the key concept in decolonizing the mind, which is civilization. Civilization is a collection of societies based on a specific knowledge base. And European civilization is based on the Enlightenment philosophy. Now, I'm going to talk about different narratives, current narratives about civilizations. But before I do that, let me pay some attention to what's going on in Palestine. I started the whole series with an analysis of Palestine, and look where we are now. The genocide has been stopped by a truce agreement between Hamas and Israel. It left 15,000 dead, 10,000 women and children up to now. And it turned out to be a big failure for the Israeli occupation force. They thought they would do a walkover in Gaza. And now 300 out of the 1,600 tanks and vehicles which they brought in have been destroyed. In the north of Israel, Hezbollah is still steadily on the offensive. People have been moved, hundreds of thousands of people have been moved from the north of Israel to the center because of the shelling by Hezbollah. In the West Bank, since October 7, 3,200 people, Palestinians, have been arrested. And yet the preparation for uprisings in the West Bank goes on. On November 23rd, Iran's foreign minister visited Doha, where he talked with the leaders of Hamas, and after that went to Beirut to talk to the leaders of Hezbollah and the local leaders of Hamas in Gaza, who went to Beirut. Apparently they can travel, without big problems. And in the press releases and conferences, they openly talk about their discussions on strategy and war plans and possible scenarios regarding the war, as well as the world's collective responsibility. And they use the term a historic and determining development that is going on. Also important is the meeting by telephone between President of Turkey, Erdogan, and of Iran, Raisi, where they talk about the common stand of the two countries against Israel and of the Muslim community against Israel. It's important because these are two major military powers. And if the genocide in Gaza continues, you might find a military offensive of Turkey and Iran against Israel. That is coming. It's not so explained in Western media, but I explained in my analysis that is what we are going to see. An interesting thing with the hostage releases is that the hostages came from Gaza City. Remember, the Israeli occupation force was proclaiming that they control Gaza cities, and yet they couldn't find the hostages. So that tells you something about the level of organization of Hamas and the a big failure of intelligence and military operations of Israel in Gaza. So we'll follow the developments every week. And before I continue with the theory of decolonizing the mind, I will come back to what's going on in the world, and particularly in Palestine. One correction for the previous episode, I said that I would talk about the current narratives about civilizations in Europe, USA, China, Russia, India, Western Asia, Latin Abiyala. I forgot to mention two others, which I add now, Africa and Oceania, which is New Zealand, Australia. Now, if I talk about the Western narrative on civilization, the Eurocentric narrative of civilization, I'll go into it, how it was articulated in the past what the socialist revolution in the world meant for that narrative, the whole concept of the end of history, which is crucial in the narrative of the Eurocentric narrative of civilization. I'll discuss Samuel Huntington's Clash of Civilizations and the concept of the grand chessboard that has been gone on since the Carter administration. The guy who most eloquently articulated the civilizational mission of Western colonialism was a British poet, Rudyard Kipling. He got a Nobel Prize in 1907, and he basically wrote a racist poem titled The White Man Burdens. And the poem goes about, it was written after the colonization of the Philippines by the US, after the Philippine-US War of 1899 till 1902. And the first lines take up the white man's burden. Send forth the best you breed, go bind your sons to exile to serve your captives' need, to wait in heavy darkness on flutter folk and wild, your new caught sullen peoples half devil and half child. He says, basically, we colonize these people, inferior people. We send our white sons there to administer their country, and it's a burden for us. But what we need to do is to civilize them. And that is basically the narrative of Western civilization, which thinks of itself as a superior civilization that needs to civilize the uncivilized in the global south. So that narrative has a modern twist with the whole issue of development aid, bringing development aid to the global south, investment, technology, culture, education, restructure the educational system, particularly the universities, as centers of production of knowledge. So you get a global world based on the imagery of the West. You make Western knowledge production and education universal, and you proclaim their Western values as universal values: capitalism, individualism, parliamentary democracy, scientific knowledge. And like Kipling said, if you want to civilize the uncivilized and they don't want to go into it, then you do it by any means necessary. Wars, lies, violence, that is what colonialism is. The narrative is based on the European Enlightenment. I'll come back to that in a minute. But there was another school in the European Enlightenment, Marxism, and that school produced a different narrative of civilization. And it lasted about 70 years, what I call the socialist interruption in civilization, beginning with the 1917 Russian Revolution. Then Mongolia People's Republic was established in 1924. Between 1944 and 1949, 11 socialist republics were added to the socialist world: Albania, Poland, Vietnam, Yugoslavia, Bulgaria, Romania, Czechoslovakia, North Korea, Hungary, China, and the German Democratic Republic, the East Germany. Between 1950 and 1989, another 11 countries were added: Cuba, Laos, Afghanistan, Angola, Benin, Cambodia, Congo-Brazzaville, Ethiopia, Mozambique, Somalia, and South Yemen. So for 70 years, the world was a socialist world. And then you get a breakdown of the Soviet Union and the socialist world, and a return to capitalist economic market systems. It's not always capitalism. I'll talk about that in other videos. I'll do a special series on China, not one, but several videos on China, where I'll discuss whether China is capitalist or not and how to characterize China. But in 1989, you had Cambodia, Hungary, Poland, and Romania going back to market economy. In 1919, Benin, Czechoslovakia, South Yemen, East Germany, Mozambique, and Bulgaria. A year later, Somalia, Ethiopia, and Soviet Union. Then a year later, Mongolia, Congo, Brazzaville, Albania, Yugoslavia, Afghanistan, Angola. And now I have remaining socialist countries, China, Vietnam, and Cuba. And I'll discuss their experience in the coming videos. Now, in the Western concept of civilization, they see Western society as the end of history. Humankind will develop, and German Enlightenment philosopher George Hegel, who lived in the 18th century and the beginning of the 19th century, he said, history moves from east to west. History has arisen in the southeast and it has subsided into itself in the northwest. The sun takes its course from morning to evening, and so we move from Asia to Europe, the west. He leaves out Africa and obviously also Abhyayala and so. So Hegel is saying, look, we are, and he put it in 1930, we are at the last stage in history, our world, our time. This is the end of history, he said in 1830. And end of history, he meant that this is how the world will look like. Everybody, every country in the world will resemble European countries. They go to the trajectories that Europe has developed. And almost 150 years later, you get a conservative Japanese American, Francis Fukuyama. He was just repeating Hegel after the demise of the Soviet Union. He said, what we may be witnessing is not just the end of the Cold War or the passing of a particular period of post-war history, but the end of history as such. That is, the end point of mankind's ideological evolution and the universalization of Western liberal democracy as the final form of human government. This is not to say that there will no longer be events to fill the pages of foreign affairs. Apparently that's a journal he reads, among the millions of journals in the world. So it's not to say that there will be no longer be events to fill the pages of foreign affairs yearly summaries of international relations, for the victory of liberalism has occurred primarily in the realm of ideas or consciousness, and is as yet incomplete in the real or material world. But there are powerful reasons for believing that it is the ideal that will govern the material world in the long run. He wrote in 1989. And this is, about 160 years later than Hegel. It's amazing to see how nonsense can be presented as greatness. And it shows the lack of imagination. Imagine Hegel saying this in 1830, the end of history, and somebody repeating it 160 years later and doesn't even evaluate what happened when it was first proclaimed in 1830. The world has changed dramatically in 1830. Abolition of slavery, decolonization, political decolonization. There are many things that tells you there is no end of history. It's nonsense. And yet, Fukuyama is presented as a great intellectual, and his books, are being discussed all over the world. Now, one of the teachers of Fukuyama was Samuel Huntington, and he wrote a book on the clash of civilizations. Huntington is a conservative, an advisor of the apartheid regimes in South Africa in the 1980s. And he wrote in 1996, that is before 9/11, he says, the West obviously differs from all other civilizations that have ever existed in that it has an overwhelming impact on all other civilizations that have existed since 1500. It also inaugurated the process of modernization and industrialization that have become worldwide. And as a result, societies in all other civilizations have been attempting to catch up with the West in wealth and modernity. So basically saying, look, we have set the standards and everybody wants to be like us, and we have impacted the world globally, which none other civilization have done. Now, the last part is true, but what does it mean? But then he's looking at how in the global north the demography is changing. And he says, Western culture is challenged by groups within Western societies. One such challenge comes from immigrants from other civilizations who reject assimilation and continue to adhere to and to propagate the values, customs, and cultures of their home societies. So apparently, the influence of the West in these home societies was not so pervasive that it eradicated all the values and cultures of those societies. And something he thought that would have been the case. So there's a contradiction there. He says this phenomenon is most notably among Muslims in Europe, who are, however, a small minority. It also manifests in lesser degree among Hispanics in the United States, who are a large minority. If assimilation fails in this case, the United States will become a cleft country with all the potential of internal strife and disunion that entails. In Europe, Western civilization could also be undermined by the weakening of its central component, Christianity. Now, what Huntington is saying is this. The Hispanics, who are, by the way, many of them are Christians, and who is a growing minority in the United States, very fastly growing. There are prognosis that they might, become even bigger than the white population. He sees them not as part of the Western civilization. It's interesting. He sees them as part of the global South with a different narrative than the West, although they are Christians, and he thinks that the central component of Western civilization is Christianity. But he means white Christians. He means white people. Here is the racism of Huntington. It's concealed. And he says culture and cultural identity, which at the broadest levels are civilizational identity, are shaping the patterns of cohesion, disintegration, and conflict in the post-Cold War world. So he's saying we live in an era of the clash of civilizations, and we are a white Christian civilization. And we are going to clash with non-white, non-Christian civilizations. That is his conception. Writing before 9/11, he says, for the first time in history, global politics is both multipolar and multi-civilizational. The survival of the West depends on Americans reaffirming their Western identity and Westerns accepting their civilization as unique, not universal, but unique, and uniting to renew and preserve it against challenges from non-Western societies. When he talks about Americans, he means white Americans. A civilization-based world order is emerging. Societies sharing cultural affinities cooperate with each other. He's meaning China and Iran and all these countries, non-Western civilizations. Efforts to shift societies from one civilization to another are unsuccessful, and countries group themselves around the lead or core states of their civilizations. So he's saying the conflict between the West and the rest is a conflict of civilization. Now, one of his close colleagues, which is Brzezinski, I don't know how you present it, said Zbigniew Brzezinski. He was a national security advisor under President Carter from 1977 to 1981. He positioned Eurasia, meaning the former Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, as a key party in shaping a new world order. And you must understand that Ukraine plays an important role. And he, writing in 1989, we're talking about almost 30 years ago, about a grand chessboard, he's saying Eurasia is just the chessboard on which the struggle for global primacy continues to be played. And that struggle involves geostrategy, the strategic management of geopolitical interests. It is noteworthy that as recently as 1942, aspirants to global power, Adolf Hitler and Joseph Stalin, agreed explicitly in the secret negotiation of November of that year that America should be excluded from Eurasia. Each realized that the injection of American power to Eurasia would preclude his ambition regarding global domination. Each shared the assumption that Eurasia is the center of the world and that he who controls Eurasia controls the world. A half century later, the issue has been redefined. Will America's primacy in Eurasia endure, and to what ends might it be applied? The ultimate objective of American policy should be benign and visionary, to shape a truly cooperative global community in keeping with long-range trends and with the fundamental interests of humankind. He means American interests when he talks about humankind. But in the meantime, it's imperative that no Eurasian challengers emerge capable of dominating Eurasia and thus also of challenging America. The formulation of a comprehensive and integrated Eurasian geostrategy is therefore the purpose of this book. Look, 30 years ago, this guy was thinking in long terms, and he was part of the establishment, although from the Democratic Party, but the difference between the Republican and Democratic is ideological, not very big. And he is saying, if you want to control the world, it's not about Africa, it's not about Latin America, Latin Abiala, it's about Eurasia, because the competitor there is Russia. And if we are able, to downgrade and basically kill Russia, then we are able to rule the world. So he was saying, look, cultural domination has been an underappreciated facet of American global power. He explains, how are we going to rule the world? And he says culture is very important. He says whatever one may think of its aesthetic values, American mass culture exercises a magnetic appeal, especially on the world use. Its attraction may be derived from the hedonistic quality of the lifestyle it projects, but its global appeal is undeniable. It means Michael Jackson and all these people have global appeal. American television programs like Friends and films account for about 3/4 of the global market. So he said our television programs or Hollywood films are all over the world. American popular music is equally dominant, while American fads, eating habits, McDonald's, and even clothing are increasingly imitated worldwide. The language of the internet is English, and an overwhelming proportion of the global computer chatter also originates from America, influencing the content of global conversation. Lastly, America has become a mecca for those seeking advanced education, with approximately 500,000 foreign students flocking to the United States, with many of the ablest never returning home. Graduates from American universities are to be found in almost every cabinet on every continent. He explains now how the United States maintains its soft power through its educational system and through its culture. And he says that's a good thing. That is what we should promote. And the idea that America will lead the world is embedded in the policy of all US presidents after World War II. And the recent president, the 2006 George Bush Bush said, the only alternative to American leadership is a dramatically more dangerous and anxious world. He said, we won't allow another to rule the world. We are the one who is going to do it forever. Barack Obama in 2014, those who argue otherwise, who suggest that America is in decline or has seen its global leadership slip away, are either misreading history or engaged in partisan politics. America must always lead on the world stage. If we don't, no one else will. The military is and always will be the backbone of that leadership. Barack Obama is saying, culture power, fine, but the military is our backbone. If we want to lead, we will lead with a strong military. Joe Biden in 2022, there's going to be a new world order out there, and we have got to lead it. He's seeing the rise of the West and the decline of the West, and they cling to this idea that the United States will leave Western civilization forever. And another conservative, first from the Republican Party and later a supporter of Hillary Clinton, Robert Kagan, who is also the husband of Victoria Nuland, which is one of the hawks that engineered the coup in Ukraine against the democratically elected president in 2014. Kagan writes, there is a matter of American hard power. What has been true since the time of Rome remains true today. There can be no world order without power to preserve it, to shape its norms, uphold its institutions, defend the sinews of its economic system, and keep the peace. If the United States begins to look like a less reliable defender of the present order, that order will begin to unravel. It reigns true today, as it has been since the Second World War, that only the United States has the capacity and the unique geographical advantages to provide global security. There can be no stable balance of power in Europe or Asia without the United States. And while we can talk about soft power and smart power, they have been and always will be of limited value when confronting raw military power. Kagan and all the establishment of the US knows that the power is based on military might. They have some 850 military bases around the world, as you can see here on the map by Press TV. And that is what keeps their power. What you see now in Ukraine and in Palestine is that the military power is not absolute. In Ukraine, the Americans are leading the war against Russia. Their generals and military, their infrastructure, their satellites, the intelligence, the weapons, the financing, the funding of the military, the stock of weapons and missiles, the Americans are guiding the war. It's not Ukrainian. It's not a war between Ukraine and Russia, but still the military power is limited. They are losing in Ukraine. In Western Asia, formerly Middle East, they lost Afghanistan. They lost Iraq. They have a base in Syria, where together with the Israelis and ISIS, remnants of ISIS, they tried to create problems for Assad in Syria. So you see a decline of Western civilization is also reflected in the decline of their military power. And here's the thing. Western civilization has been characterized by perpetual wars and genocide, and the destruction of a planet through nuclear war is still a real option. And the colonization of the mind, as Brzezinski says, plays a crucial role in Western domination. The next episode, I will deal with how the concept of civilization has emerged in China and how, this is a rival concept of the concept of the US of Western civilization as an eternal global civilization, which is the end of history. That's for the next episode, next Monday. And if you want to just look up the book, you should go into paragraph 2.5, the crisis of Western civilization, where you could, read about what I'm saying now. You could download the PowerPoint presentation at sandohero.com. And if you want to support the DTM channel, you could subscribe to it, click on the subscribe button, share the videos with friends, families, and colleagues, and encourage them to subscribe, get involved in discussion group. And if you are able to make a donation, please do, and see at the website sandohero.com how you could do that. So thank you for your attention, and I hope to see you next week.